I'm going to be reading today from a version of the New Testament called the First Nations version. And this is a version written by a group of about over 100 Indigenous writers. They came together and reworked the scriptures, as we know, to follow Indigenous storytelling. And so you'll hear some different names and some different flow of the words. And I invite you to listen with an open heart and mind. The ones who eat and drink my body and blood live in me, and I live in them. In the same way, the living Father sent me and gave me life. The ones who feed on me will also have life. The bread from above is not like the bread that our ancestors ate and then died. This bread gives the life of the world to come that never fades away, full of beauty and harmony. These are the words he spoke to the people at the gathering house in the village of Comfort, or Capernaum. When the ones who walked the road with Creator sets free, our Jesus, heard this, many of them said, "These words are too hard to hear. Who can even listen to them?" Creator sets free knew in his spirit what was troubling them. So he said, "Do these words make you stumble from the path? What will you do when you see the true human being going back up to where he came from? Life comes from the Spirit, not from the human body. My words have spirit and life in them, but some of you have no faith in who I am." He said this because he knew from the beginning the ones who did not believe and the one who would betray him. He then finished by saying, "That is why I said, no one can come to me on their own, but only as a gift from my Father." When they heard this, many who followed him turned and walked away. Creator sets free looked at the 12 and said, "Do you also want to walk away?" Wisdom keeper, the one who hears, Simon, who's also named Stands on the Rock, or Peter, answered him, "Who else would we walk this road with?" He said, "You have the words that give the life of the world to come, that never fades away, full of beauty and harmony. We have come to know and trust in you as the Holy One from the Great Spirit." May God bless to our learning and our understanding these words from Scriptures. I pray that my words land with you this morning the way that God intends them to. First, I wanted to bring you this version of Scripture because I think it just breaks open so much when we can imagine how the stories are told and how we can read them. I also love the naming of Jesus as Creator sets free. To think of Jesus and that life as our God, our Creator, setting God's self free in the world and setting us free really helps illuminate to me. In the lectionary, if you're following it here, the last number of weeks have been all about bread. We started with the feeding of the 5,000 with the loaves and the fish that were given by a child. Then we moved with the crowd as they followed Jesus across the water to another location to ask him questions about what they saw. Imagine it. You're part of this crowd. You've just seen something spectacular. All of a sudden, there were more bread and fish than you have ever seen in one place. I'm sure you would have tons of questions too. How did it get there? Where did it come from? What does it mean? What was God trying to say through this bread, if anything? How can you possibly believe what just happened? Do you believe what you saw? Are you thinking about going to the optometrist, maybe? Well, the crowd was initially enthusiastic about what they saw and enthusiastic about the idea that Jesus was like Moses, providing a miraculous bread for their survival. And they were initially hesitant, actually, and upset. Then, when Jesus compared himself to the bread and not to Moses. What do you mean you're not going to provide us bread to survive? That's what we need right now. You aren't here to help us be nourished physically? What do you mean this is all spiritual? What, you're the embodiment of spiritual fulfillment? What does that mean? Again, do we need to see a doctor? Are we okay? Are we losing it a little bit? The initial response to this may have been rejection from the crowd, because they were assuming here that Jesus is talking about cannibalism, likely. This was quite a common interpretation of this message in the early church, actually. Many early Christ followers faced discrimination or persecution for this exact claim that, well, Jesus is telling you to eat his body and blood, so obviously you are cannibals. In this passage that we just heard, when the disciples are questioning Jesus' teaching, they're questioning the logical content here. It just didn't make sense to them. What was he telling them to do? Now let's put ourselves in the shoes of the disciples. They've never experienced the Eucharist, the sacredness of communion. They have no idea what that is. So this first iteration of eating flesh and drinking blood probably was quite shocking. This teaching is difficult, they say. Who can accept this? This is too hard to hear. Doubt here is the integral part of the disciples coming to understand their faith. They can show their doubt, not pretend it's not there. They can ask the questions, and they trust that there'll be some kind of answer, whether it's the answer they think it will be or not. To partake in this ritual as Jesus as the manna, the bread, Jesus as the bread of life, involves a really intense reliance on God. This requires a lot of trust. One of the words that the author uses in this passage of John is the word abide. Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood abide in me, and I in them. Now, abide is often translated from the Greek word meno, which also sometimes is translated as remain and not abide. So let's hear that line again with this word instead. Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood remain in me, and I remain in them. So feeding on Jesus as the bread of life, means we are to remain or abide with or in Christ. That being said, abiding with Christ is actually quite difficult sometimes. Even the disciples know this, and they admit that. Staying with these messages and learning from the life of Christ is a long and often confusing process. It requires a lot of reflection, a lot of thought, tons of learning, and a lot of community building. I'm sure you all are aware of that. For many, a quick fix would be ideal, the fastest solution and the easiest workload possible. Quick fixes seem to be the way that our world likes to function, particularly fast fixes. Putting a picture over a hole in the wall, for example, or taping your broken glasses together. We can talk a lot about the TTC and quick fixes, I'm sure. Jesus here, though, is not offering a quick fix Band-Aid solution. Jesus here is offering a long road to discipleship that includes, yes, doubt and questioning. That is integral. This story shows us that the disciples, the ones who were doubtful and questioning the teaching, end up being the ones that abide in Jesus. They stick with him even through the difficult teaching, and that is the point here. Here they recognize Jesus' words as life-giving, and they don't turn away just because it's confusing or complicated or more difficult than they had initially thought. They stick closely to Jesus, to their bread, and just listen to the words in order to be fed. They chew on them, trying to figure out where the notes are. The disciples' doubt brought them closer to Jesus in the end. Their doubt and their questions allowed them the opportunity for resolution and for closeness. I find this has been true in my own spiritual life. What about you? Where have there been moments where you have asked, "Hey, God, this is really hard. How do you expect me to accept this? How can I possibly go through with this? How can we solve this? What does this mean for us? How can I believe that you will be there with me through this, figuring this out? What are we going to do?" In my own life, this has happened many times. I find, however, that when this happened, I'm provided with an opportunity to dive straight into the doubts, to ask the questions that I need to ask, however angrily I want to ask them, and seek the reassurance that I need. I tend to come out of it with perhaps not a deeper understanding of the situation, but a deeper feeling of connection to my faith that allows the trust to work. Understanding and clarity may come over time, but the connection and the spiritual practices that arise have been the most meaningful for me. A few years ago, I left quite a harmful and abusive living situation. My life had turned upside down, and I had no idea what I was possibly supposed to take from it. I needed to reorganize my whole life. I needed to care for my animals and create a new, healthy lifestyle for myself. So I sat with those feelings. What the heck, God? Why are you putting me through this? How can I possibly accept this? What is this supposed to mean? How could I have not seen this coming? Was it my fault? Did I deserve what happened to me? How can I focus on my spiritual practices and our relationships when I literally have to organize my entire life? I took those doubts and I sat with them. In sitting with the doubts and my really intense emotions, I was able to ground myself actually in the vastness of the world and the universe, the possibilities that lied ahead. There were so many, and my spiritual connection to the divine. I rolled out my altar, made it a little bit bigger, lit more candles, sang a few more songs, and leaned into the grief. Really allowed me to work through the feelings and rely on God to release what I couldn't work through. Felt like we were carrying a big couch, trying to move it out of the space. Couldn't carry the couch by myself. Still sucked that I had to carry the couch, though. We worked on it together. Doubt, grief, confusion, these are all integral pieces to our faith. From what I've heard about some of the stories that have gone on in your community and in our lives in this city, you also have a fair share of grief, of sadness, and perhaps doubt. Well, I'm here to remind you that those pieces are crucial. Those are crucial to having faith, to building meaningful relationships, and to connecting with God. Lean into the hard feelings. It sucks sometimes, yes. But understand that even the disciples doubted teachings, and they felt the hard feelings. These are important pieces of our faithful lives. But remember, in this, you are not alone either. You have each other, and we have the loving arms of God to hold our burdens and doubts, to help us move that couch. We will get through these doubt-filled moments. We'll be nourished and we'll be fed by the bread of life, as Jesus taught, and the eternal love of God will continue to hold us. May it be so.